Hi, I'm Tom Eschen, the host of Power and Politics, the conversation about the issues that are impacting you the most with the people and the advocates and the officials that are making those decisions and holding them accountable along the way, too. Today we speak with Deshanna Wiggins, the CEO of the Albany Black Chamber of Commerce. This has been around for a few years now. We speak to her about some of the issues that business owners are facing in Albany, specifically black and minority-owned businesses, and what her organization does to help incentivize them and help to prepare them for success. We also speak about that proposed investment into the city of Albany by the state, that $400 million, and where she thinks that money needs to go, where they've been told that money could go potentially here moving forward. We also speak on a grander scale about DEI and how some of those initiatives are being rolled back and what she says needs to be invested in regards to that and why she believes that is very beneficial here to our society and our businesses as a whole. She also just got back to Albany from Atlanta, where she spent a little more than a decade. She was born in Albany. She's been now back here for a few years. We speak to the differences between those two places and what she wants to bring back to Albany to help those businesses and others continue to grow, along with the city here as well. Thanks, as always, for watching. You can always listen wherever you get your podcasts at Power and Politics on our page. You can also watch the entire conversation on our YouTube page, CBS 6 Albany. So Deshanna joins us right now. Thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Let's start with doing business in Albany and some of the people you speak with. What are some of the biggest challenges and some of the biggest issues you see right now in terms of being successful here in Albany?
Well, some of the challenges that my members, my prospective members, come to me with is just the resources and accessibility to the information. When I came back home, because this is my hometown, I always knew of kind of historically how our marginalized communities had not had a seat at the table, had not had the education and information. It wasn't the type of topics we talked about at our dinner table, right? Survival was more so of that, right? We talked about money and scarcity, not in abundance. And so when I'm talking to our members, a lot of them have the talent, but they don't necessarily have the business acumen. And so part of what my challenge and my mission is to do for our members is to make sure that they have that education. Make sure that they are aware of what is missing when they're trying to start and or scale their business.
Yeah, and you think about, we'll get a little bit more into this in a few moments, in terms of investing in that. Yes. Where should that come from and how does that happen?
Well, I think it works with a lot of the partnerships. So there are a lot of community programs, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations, there's a lot of public and private businesses as well, and the Chamber is one of those resources. So the investment has to come into, first, that individual stating, okay, I know that there's a common quote of, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so once you're introduced to that information, it's about making that personal investment and saying, I need to be able to take this step so that I can go even further. So with those separate organizations that offer business planning classes, right? A lot of times businesses will start, they create their own logo, they go online, they, follow the process with New York State to become or get their LLC, and then they go straight to the bank, right? But they're missing, right, how to build out this business plan. And for some of the other businesses who've not had issues with that, it's about the accessibility and the scaling of it, right? I've done all this work, but then I go to these events and I'm kind of at lost, right? And so we're trying to make sure that we provide enough information, networking opportunities, and programs to fill in those gaps.
You are part of this because of probably what you thought of as a void in Albany, right? And how much, what do you need to be able to do your work on a bigger level? Is there enough investment right now in something like this?
I think that there is investment enough. We'll leave that.
Yeah.
But I definitely think for me, it's about the collaboration. In fact, the Chamber just hosted last month, concluding our Black History Month programming, what we like to call our monthly mixer last Friday. And we did it in conjunction with the other Chamber leaders. This was the first time that I had heard and that the other CEOs of those organizations told me that they had come together to just do a joint networking mixer. We had about 100, 130 people in the room. And so these are all businesses from the Capital Region and their members, those Capital Region Chamber members, and in the Capital Region that they've come together. I can't tell you how many emails that I'm still filtering through that said, I had no idea this business existed just 10 minutes away from me, right, or from my business. And they felt that those voids and those gaps were being filled. So I think the best way to approach it is by just working laterally, figuring out what's around and starting there.
You know, right now there's a proposal at the state level in the budget to put hundreds of millions into the city of Albany, the 400 million as a whole. We've heard officials say, okay, here's what I think should happen. As you, someone that represents business leaders, owners, and a resident of Albany, what do you think should be done with that money?
Well, we got the opportunity just yesterday to be able to host the roadshow for the governor's State of the State Address. Commissioner Moy, who is the commissioner of the OGS, had an opportunity to go through that budget line item specifically for the state and for the capital region. And a lot of the feedback from our members, from our guests, was that it needs to go to particular areas and it needs to be filtered. It's one thing to make these proposals that are incredibly ambitious and useful, but it's another thing when we see the end of a project and still see these marginalized communities not be impacted. And so if I were to delineate these funds, I would absolutely say our infrastructure needs it. Being able to make this place attractive to those investors, to those developers, to those businesses who want to franchise their business, we've got to make the city of Albany, particularly as well as the capital region, more attractive to that. I like being from a small town. Being from a small town, we all kind of know each other, we work within that, but we've got to start thinking globally and acting locally.
Is that in the form of a big project? I know there's been some things floated out there, or is it growing housing? Is it investing in businesses, giving some stipends, I guess, subsidies, if you will?
Absolutely. So based on the breakdown that we got, housing is absolutely one of those, small businesses is another, making sure that there's environmental justice actually happening as well. And just filtering out to those different organizations, nonprofits, and making sure that from a student level, executive professional level, and just a resident as a whole have what they need.
I wanted to ask you one more question about that, but for the sake of our timing here, you hosted a roundtable with Paul Tonko recently.
I did.
And there was residents that were outspoken, and it was described as a bit of a, I wouldn't say intense, but it was a very passionate event. What did you learn, not only from the congressman, but also from what some of those individuals were saying? Was it Albany High, I believe that's what it was?
Yes, my alma mater, actually. So I spent a lot of time on that stage, this time in a different capacity. What I was able to take from that is that at the end of the day, people want to be seen and they want to be heard. There's one, Paul Tonko, Congressman Tonko, is an amazing congressman, and he has done great work and been an assist to the chamber. But what I realize is that folks want to hear more about your specific plan and how we're planning to actually fight back, right? It's one thing to say that these things that are happening, especially in our political climate right now, are not beneficial or not impacting. But what are we going to actually do to make sure that it doesn't further? And so what I learned from the individuals that day was that though they were very passionate, I understood. I got their sentiment that they were speaking up for their rights and they wanted their advocate to be able to do the very same.
Yeah, there's one issue I did want to ask you about, and that's DEI, and that's been thrown around a lot recently.
Yes.
And I was found a clip on the internet the other day. I wanted you to give you an opportunity to respond to this. Is that some individuals in the defense of getting rid of it at different levels of corporate America, whatever it's going to be, is that they quote Martin Luther King and say, judge someone not by the color of the skin, but the content of their character. And they say they justify getting rid of DEI by that. How do you respond to that?
That's very interesting. I think we have to really look at what they're stating and then what is actually happening. When we're talking about those DEI measures, especially looking at the African American demographic, it's funny, I was just looking at a stat that I repeated earlier this year, and it says that based on New York State's Comptroller's Office, they say that we are leading in minority-owned businesses. And the African American population is about a little less than 15% in the state of New York. However, of the businesses that are owned, only 3.4% of them are owned by Black people. So if you're looking at that and you're saying that these measures need to be repealed, we're less than 5%. So I don't think that folks are really actually looking at the data and understanding that for our particular demographic, we're still trying to break down these barriers. So I think these DEI measures are actually helping non-Black minority individuals. And I think what will end up happening is we'll come back around to see that this is going to kind of bite them. It's going to be a situation where it's going to impact our nation greatly. Especially when we're thinking about who falls under this minority bracket. White women fall under that, and typically they're the ones who leverage these DEI advantages. And so we'll see. We'll see.
Why is it important? Why do you believe diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that should be an initiative that this country uses right now?
I think it's important because the stats say so. We absolutely, as a Black woman, I'm going to say that my voice matters and that I matter. Yeah. That is absolutely true to me, and it should be true to everyone else. However, I also know the data, and the data says that if you have a diverse board, if you have a diverse employee base, your business does better by 40%. What business doesn't want to do better by almost 40%, right? Yeah. And so in order for you to have a better product, in order for you to have anything better, you have to have a diverse response to it. You have to know how your product will do in the market. And the market isn't just one person, one way, right? And so I think it's really important for us to understand that this is not about trying to jump ahead of the line. DEI measures have existed because historically we weren't chosen, even though we were overqualified. So yeah.
Does it frustrate you the way it's used in some ways now?
Absolutely.
Part of the rhetoric?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it frustrates all of us. But again, being what some would consider at the bottom of the totem pole, a Black and a woman, I understand that this is kind of how the ecosystem has worked in my experience on this earth. And so I believe that this is a time, it will pass. We have to stay the course and do our work.
Maybe beyond that, I think one of the initiatives of the Albany Black Chamber is to close wealth gaps,
Absolutely.
Create diversity within entrepreneurs, corporations. How do you go about doing that?
I think, again, it's pointing out how much further along your businesses can be by appealing to a broader audience. And so the Chamber does just that. I think us being able to do this joint mixer was a great way to showcase that, right? And being able to put diverse people in a group so that those gaps that folks aren't often thinking about and when they're trying to develop a product or their business, that they have that information. And so when we're thinking about those wealth gaps and filling them, we have to see what this does not only nationally but globally, and we have to appeal to that audience.
You said something earlier about a business, I don't know if it was acumen or education on sort of the way to run one or what's going to have you, some of the gaps you fill, right, at the end of the day. Why do those gaps exist to begin with? What do you see as some of the root causes of that? Is it an education issue? Was it just a societal issue?
Yeah, I think when we're thinking about, again, you take your average, I'll take mine, for example, right? I've been fortunate enough to grow up in a two-parent household, and my dad had a degree. He worked full-time as an educator. My mother was in the education system. But even with their access and leverage, they came and were brought up in very blue-collar homes. So we sat down and talked about finance, but in a very different way than, say, perhaps you or your counterparts, right? Yeah. Where finance was a part of just, you knew about taxes far more and in a real way that I did. I just knew that I had to do them, right? And pray that I didn't have to owe. So I think when we're talking about or using that approach and talking about business, we have all of the talent in the world. But if these are things that are not, traditionally offered to us, or when we try to get access, we're held out because of now what we're experiencing, DEI, being repealed, then it makes it that much harder.
What kinds of businesses do you try and work with and try and enhance it? You said it's a variety, right? You have people that don't even know that some of these exist in Albany. Educate our viewers. What kinds do exist?
So
in Albany?
our membership really ranges from the small businesses who are legacy businesses, right? So although they are small in employee count, they've been doing business for generations and have been very successful. And then we represent businesses that are small in nature, the nonprofits, the grassroots organizations, right? But across finance, across retail, across the corporate end and business, we really represent a huge gamut. And so we're still also a new organization. So I think what we're trying to find out is our core demographic, what their needs are, to be able to speak with them. But my goal is to be able, if you have a business, no matter what industry it is, you're going to need something from another industry. And so if I can put you all, no matter at what advanced or entry level you are, together, then that's the greatest benefit.
Now you've been doing this for a few years, a short amount
Just
of time.
a couple.
Yeah. In terms of the Albany Black Chamber,
Yeah.
How has it been trying to find a place and trying to find that voice here in the region?
Oh, what I would say is that we have definitely gotten the support and the morale is high, but things take time. This is a demographic where, again, they see you once, it's like, okay. And now I think we're over that hunch where this is our third year in business, going into our second of just membership, and the consistency is the biggest thing. And so folks are seeing you as a trusted partner and starting to engage more.
You hear some things from businesses as a whole in Albany about some of the challenges they face beyond some of the societal issues that you try to address and things like that. I think some have been concerned about crime, some concerned about investment. Is that what you hear as well? And how do you work with that? How do you deal with that?
We work with all the partners, right? And so it's, for me, really important. I worked in government before this, and I know how powerful that public-private sector is. And so making sure that we are constantly in communication with our elected officials, making sure that we have a good relationship with those big corporate businesses and those very small, and like I said, entry-level ones. It's about just exchanging information and building on that relationship, because to that point, a lot of my businesses who have space, right, who have their own brick and mortar, the crime is a huge issue. Oftentimes they have to close early, they can't open at all, and it's just a big hindrance. And so it's just making sure that we're staying connected on a local level and on a statewide level of how do we actually work together to address these issues.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question. You grew up in Albany, and then you went to school and worked in Georgia for more than a decade. You came back a few years ago. What has changed?
A lot has changed and a lot has not, right? I think what was coming from this area, I kind of understood the mentality, I understood the demographics, so I was expecting that. But to see really, truly the amount of people that have left the region for one reason or the other, right, was a shock. But then to also see that the place, specifically like Albany, has not truly advanced in its infrastructure build out and it's inviting new businesses. And I think depending on who you ask, there's definitely been some great advancement. But as a whole, I think we can do a better job, private and public sector working together at making this place more attractive to the talent that we need so that we're able to offer more opportunities.
Was Georgia the first time you had left the area, left home, and lived somewhere else for a period of time?
And lived somewhere else, yes. But I was an avid traveler as a kid. So.
I guess I'm curious. I know that we were talking before how I grew up in central New York, and then I moved to Michigan. That was the first time I had been. I worked in Syracuse to start my career. I moved to Michigan. It was like a different world. I guess, what did you learn from just seeing a different, I don't want to say culture, but seeing a different a place that,
absolutely.
Did anything surprise you? And like, oh, things aren't done the same way up there.
Oh, yeah.
Down in Georgia.
The biggest change was especially, I always say that Atlanta, there is this quote that Atlanta is not a real place. And it is and it isn't and all at the same time. For me, culturally, it was the biggest but best culture shock. growing up in this particular area, as a black female, I thought that there was only one of three jobs I could do. I could work for the state, I could work in education, or I could work in healthcare. Those are our industries. Nothing wrong with that. But I never saw anything privatized with ownership with black women, right? Particularly, but with black people overall. And so going to Atlanta, attending a historically black college and university, put me right in that epicenter of seeing it all happen, right? I got the opportunity to work under three mayoral leaderships. I worked for a black female judge, and her entire staff were black females, right? And so this was the first time that I had that type of accessibility to, one, even know that it was possible, and to see it done well. Right, to see a city established and run and be attractive, not just nationally but globally, and so it was really important for me, which is why I always wanted to come back. But having that experience and being able not necessarily to replicate, because Albany is very specific, and I appreciate that. So it's not about making Albany another Atlanta, but it's certainly about expressing those opportunities to a demographic that has not largely had it.
What do you think were the factors that led to that uplifting for people like you, that let you succeed and feel like you could in a place like that?
It was about those individuals being strategic and working together to make sure that there was always a platform, right, for the advancement and excelling of black businesses, communities, and just the residents overall, you know. And so when you have a diversity of people involved, then you're able to impact even more.
What'd you learn by working for the government down there?
Oh.
In the political realm.
Yeah, I learned that always stay on your toes, right? I think the best thing that I understood was that by really making sure that, and I hope that this doesn't come off wrong, but if you make sure that black people are good, you make sure all people are good. And to elaborate on that, historically, you know, we've been in environments where we've always had to be the other, and we've had to placate to the mainstream and to the population, and sometimes our viewpoints weren't always, you know, considered, heard, or cared for. And so to be in that environment and to see that while it was heavily produced by people of color, it impacted everyone, even if they did not look like us. And I thought that that was really, really important. I did not necessarily experience that here. The people who got the most help were people who were poor, not necessarily advantaged, that looked like me. And I wanted to make sure that that wasn't the stigma that continued here.
How do you think New York does in terms of their state politics, right down the street from where you are in that?
Well, we, like I said, based on the comptroller's data, you know, we're exceeding and leading with the minority-owned businesses. So I think we're doing fairly well. I think that there's always room for improvement, and I am looking forward to working with those partners to make sure that that happens.
On the business side of things, we'll get back to that, because I was curious about the whole, these nanotech hub investments, semiconductor. How does that, is there a trickle down? Does it impact people like you and the people that you work with?
Well, I think majorly it's going to help the workforce, right? If we have, and I sit on an advisory council that works with CEG, and they're going to be doing that on-ramp program, and I think that that's incredible, because what it's going to do is allow for the folks who don't want to do traditional education to be able to have another opportunity, right? To be able to make a living, to get the training and the access that they absolutely need. And so I do believe that it will help the workforce demographic for this region, but then also, again, be an attractor piece. People will be coming to this state specifically for these programs and for these jobs. My job with the chamber is to make sure that it impacts our local folks first, and then make sure that it is accessible for others.
You mentioned a few moments ago when you grew up in Albany, there was 3 different industries, or I guess jobs that you could have. Is that another one, or is it wider?
Absolutely.
That's another.
Definitely, that nanotechnology, the technology field in and of itself certainly has really made this area robust. What we need to make sure is that it's diverse.
Another thing, when you were in Georgia, you worked in the film entertainment industry.
Yeah, I did.
What did you do with that?
So my office, so statewide, there was an incentive for folks to film in the state of Georgia. But on top of that, the city of Atlanta, because of its popularity, also gave an additional credit if you wanted to film in the city. And so my office, we're responsible for anything that was in city limits and permitting the actual films. So that was a really great and fun and busy time.
Yeah, that's one of the more, I could say, controversial
Yeah.
investments that New York makes. And I know in this budget, I believe the governor wants to up the money allotted for those film incentivized tax credits.
Yeah.
From your experience in that, what does that mean for a region or a state to invest that much money into that?
So if I'm not going to throw out the quotes because I don't want to to get those stats wrong. But I don't think people understand how big film industries are and what goes into actually putting a film on. You have to utilize every local business. My office was responsible for making sure that when a set came here, that not only were the hospitality, the dining experience, the retail experience, but you have to think about the dry cleaners, right? Those small mom and pop shops, right, who've been their legacy. You think about those who do the small catering just to be able to provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner on set. There's so many businesses, the car service. There's so many small businesses that in Atlanta I got to see these businesses literally live off of the industry in and of itself. If they never took another job, they would be okay, simply because the city and the state came together with these incentives to make sure that we were a competitor to New York and to other areas.
I remember I watched the hearing on it. They had a tax credit hearing, and it did seem hard to monetize, right? To be able to know just how far that economic impact will go. Right, and it sounds like it is very intricate of a situation.
So not only does the state see that, but again, it's businesses.
Yeah.
And what I would definitely work with, and what's interesting is that it was a part of what I wanted to do when I initially came back. It was like, how do we make sure that the film industry for this particular region, we know New York City gets a lot, but for this particular region starts to get on the map for that, because it really economically changes your area. It brings so much attraction, tourism, but certainly it impacts the businesses.
I have one more, and it's a call back to what you mentioned when you talked about the presentation on Wednesday from Jeanette Moy, the environmental justice aspect of this funding. Did they elaborate at all on that? I'm curious what that would mean.
Yeah, they touched on it. I won't, again, misquote, but the biggest thing is just making sure, like when we're talking about the South End, I remember talking about what's different now, and when I came home, I was driving not too long ago in the streets that I grew up in, and the blocks had no trees. And I couldn't for the life of me, like, what, now, I'm not going to presume because I don't necessarily know, but what I do know is that when you don't have a shade, right, it costs you so much more to be able to heat your home and cool your home, right? And so if you can't afford to do that, you're often pushed out. So it's these very kind of microaggressive ways, and I don't know, and I won't say that is why the trees were missing. But it was interesting to see them in certain areas and not in others, right? And so it's those very real ways of figuring out how do we make sure that with this budget line item that it's impacting all of our residents, no matter their zip code.
Yeah. Deshanna, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks once again for joining us here tonight on Power and Politics and our conversation with Deshanna Wiggins. You can always watch the full conversation on our YouTube page, CBS 6 Albany, or listen wherever you get your podcasts on our Power and Politics podcast page, where you can also find our PNP Top 3, the top 3 headlines of the week. We'll see you next week.